No prison in American history has ever had an escape. Not an attempt that came close. Not a plan that got past the planning stage. In 30 years of operation, ADX Florence has a perfect record. And the reason it has that record will disturb you more than the prison itself. Most prisons take your freedom. They put walls around the life you had and tell you that you will get pieces of it back eventually if you behave correctly. ADX Florence does something different. It takes the one thing that walls alone cannot reach: your mind. The United States federal government built ADX Florence in Colorado in 1994 with one specific purpose: to house the human beings that every other maximum security prison in the country had determined it could not safely contain. The people inside ADX Florence are not simply dangerous. They are dangerous in a category that required the construction of an entirely new kind of facility to manage. Cartel leaders, terrorist masterminds, mob bosses, spies who betrayed their country, men who ran criminal operations from inside conventional prisons and proved that conventional prisons could not stop them. Today we go inside every layer of ADX Florence. What it looks like, who is inside it, what it does to the human mind after months and years of conditions specifically engineered to prevent organized thought, and the detail that nobody who designed this facility will say out loud, but that every psychologist who has studied it will tell you without hesitation. Some prisons are designed to punish. ADX Florence was designed to erase. ACT won the box. The cell at ADX Florence measures approximately 7 feet by 12 feet. If you are standing in the middle of it right now and you extend both arms, your fingertips are close to touching opposite walls simultaneously. The ceiling is 9 feet above the floor. The floor is poured concrete. The walls are poured concrete. The door is solid steel with a narrow slot through which meals are delivered 3 times a day without any direct human contact between the person delivering the food and the person receiving it. There is a desk, concrete, built into the wall so it cannot be moved or used as an object. There is a bed, concrete platform with a thin mattress. There is a toilet and a sink combined into a single unit bolted to the wall. There is a shower in the cell itself because inmates do not go to a communal shower facility. There is no communal anything at ADX Florence. And then there is the window, 4 inches wide, positioned at an angle specifically calculated so that the person inside the cell can see a portion of the sky. Not the ground, not another building, not another person, the sky. A 4-inch strip of whatever color the sky happens to be on that particular day. That is the entire view available to an inmate in ADX Florence for 23 hours of every 24-hour day. The 1 hour outside the cell is exercise alone, in a slightly larger concrete enclosure with walls too high to see over and a mesh ceiling through which the sky is visible in a slightly wider format than the cell window provides. You do not see other inmates during this hour. You do not speak to anyone. You walk in a space slightly larger than the space you just came from, and then you go back. That is the entirety of the physical world available to a person inside ADX Florence. Concrete, steel, a 4-inch window, and 23 hours of a silence so complete that former inmates describe it as a physical presence rather than an absence. Something that fills the space around you rather than simply being what remains when sound is removed. The first thing most new rivals do in that silence is talk to themselves. Not because they are losing their minds yet. Because the sound of a human voice, even their own, confirms something about reality that the cell by itself does not confirm. That they still exist. That the world outside the concrete is still there. That time is still moving. In ADX Florence, without external confirmation, none of those things feel as certain as they should. ACT2 who ends up here, you do not end up in ADX Florence for being dangerous in the ordinary sense of that word. The American federal prison system, full of dangerous people housed in maximum security facilities that function without requiring the conditions ADX Florence imposes. You end up in ADX Florence for being dangerous in a specific and documented way that conventional maximum security cannot contain. The first category is the people who ran criminal operations from inside other prisons. These are the individuals who demonstrated, through direct evidence gathered by law enforcement and prison intelligence, that putting them behind standard maximum security walls did not stop their organizations from functioning. Drug trafficking orders issued from a prison phone. Murder contracts ranged through coded letters that passed through institutional mail. Business arrangements with rival organizations negotiated through visitor meetings that looked, on the surface, like family conversations. ADX Florence exists in part because of men like these. Men who proved that the limitation of conventional imprisonment was not the walls. It was the communication. ADX Florence addresses that problem by making communication almost impossible. The second category is the terrorists. The 1993 World Trade Center bombers. Several of the individuals involved in planning the 1998 American embassy bombings in Africa that killed over 200 people. Men convicted in connection with attacks that killed Americans on American soil and abroad. They are in ADX Florence not only because of the severity of what they did, but because of the specific security concern that their continued ability to communicate with ideologically aligned individuals outside the prison would present. The third category is perhaps the most instructive about what ADX Florence actually is. These are the people transferred from other maximum security facilities, not because they committed additional crimes, but because they were identified as being capable of organizing resistance within the prison environment itself. People who, in a conventional facility, would have risen to a position of influence within the inmate population and used that influence in ways the institution could not control. The people whose removal from a general population unit made that unit safer and more manageable for the staff responsible for it. These people have been identified by the prison system as something specific, too organized to be safely held anywhere that other people can be influenced by their presence. The names inside Ramzi Youssef planned the 1993 World Trade Center bombing and was convicted of the 1990 for Philippine Airlines bombing. He is in ADX Florence. Terry Nichols was convicted of conspiracy in the 1995 Oklahoma City bombing that killed 168 people, including 19 children, in a daycare center. He is in ADX Florence. Eric Rudolph carried out for bombings across the American South between 1996 and 1998, including the Centennial Olympic Park bombing in Atlanta during the Summer Olympic Games. He is in ADX Florence. Jokart Sarnaev was convicted for the 2013 Boston Marathon bombing that killed 3 people and injured hundreds of spectators who came to watch a sporting event on a spring afternoon. He is in ADX Florence. El Chapo Joaquin Guzman, the man who built the Sinaloa cartel into a $30 billion annual enterprise and escaped from Mexican maximum security prisons twice before his final capture, was transferred to ADX Florence after his sentencing, specifically because American authorities determined that a conventional facility could not guarantee he would not find a way to continue directing cartel operations. He is in ADX Florence. These are not names from a thriller. These are human beings who are alive right now, in cells measuring 7 by 12 feet, looking at a 4-inch window, eating meals pushed through a slot in a steel door, in a facility designed so completely around the elimination of their capacity to influence anything beyond the walls of their individual cells that the facility itself is the most complete argument for what total institutional control actually looks like. Act 3, what it does to the mind. Now, we arrive at the part of this video that the United States Bureau of Prisons does not include in its official descriptions of ADX Florence. The part that the psychologists and psychiatrists who have been permitted limited access to the facility, and the former inmates who have been transferred to other facilities after years inside, describe in terms that are consistent enough across enough independent sources to be treated as a reliable account of what prolonged solitary confinement at the intensity ADX Florence imposes actually produces in the human brain. The human brain is not designed for the conditions at ADX Florence. It is designed through millions of years of evolution as a social species to process a continuous stream of external stimulation social interaction, environmental variation, the constant minor inputs from a world that changes moment to moment. Remove all of that and the brain does not simply become bored. It begins to generate its own stimulation. In the early weeks of ADX Florence confinement, inmates report heightened sensitivity to the minimal stimuli that are available. The sound of a meal tray being positioned outside the door becomes significant. A change in the quality of light through the 4-inch window occupies attention in a way that it never would in a normal environment. The mind is searching for variation and finding it in inputs so small that they would register as below the threshold of conscious attention in any normal context. After months, the pattern changes. Anxiety arrives. Not situational anxiety about specific concerns. Pervasive anxiety without a clear object. A continuous low-level state of agitation that former inmates describe as impossible to fully explain to someone who has not experienced the conditions that produce it. After a year or more, the documentation becomes more clinically significant. Studies of long-term solitary confinement at the intensity ADX Florence represents have found measurable changes in the brain's processing of social information. The regions of the brain that handle social interaction, that process the presence of other people and interpret their behavior and intentions, begin to show reduced activity in imaging studies of people held in long-term isolation. They are not being used, and like any capacity that is not used, they begin to atrophy. Former inmates who have been transferred out of ADX Florence after years inside describe difficulty in social situations that goes beyond awkwardness or readjustment difficulty. They describe a fundamental disruption in the ability to read other people, to interpret facial expressions, to process the normal social signals that people exchange in every human interaction, to feel comfortable in the presence of other human beings in a way that feels natural, rather than managed. The hallucinations documented in research on prolonged solitary confinement are not the product of pre-existing mental illness in every case. They are the product of a brain that has been deprived of external input for long enough that it begins generating its own in ways that the person experiencing them cannot fully distinguish from external reality. Shadows that move, sounds in the silence that have no source, presences that are not there. The brain filling the void that ADX Florence creates with whatever it can manufacture from inside itself. A federal judge reviewing conditions at ADX Florence in 2012 described what he saw as a kind of slow-motion psychological torture that fell just within the boundaries of what American law permits. Just within. That phrase deserves to sit with you for a moment. The most secure prison in the United States was designed to operate just within the legal boundary of what constitutes torture. Not comfortably within, just within. 30 years, 0 escapes, 0 attempts, a perfect record maintained not primarily through physical security, though the physical security is comprehensive, but through the complete elimination of the mental space in which escape planning becomes possible. Some prisons take your freedom. ADX Florence takes the instrument you would use to get it back. The men inside it are the most dangerous individuals the American federal system has ever housed. Terrorists, cartel kings, spies, mob bosses, men who proved in other facilities that walls alone were not enough to stop them from being what they are. And ADX Florence answered that proof with something more permanent than walls. It answered it with silence, with a 4-inch window, with 23 hours in a box so complete that the human brain, given enough time inside it, begins to eat itself for stimulation. Every organization we cover on Dark Ranks has a price at the top. Sometimes the price is paid in blood, sometimes in years of violent service. In ADX Florence, the price is paid in something more fundamental than either of those things. It is paid in the slow, documented, scientifically measurable erosion of the capacity to be fully human. Subscribe to Dark Ranks, because next time we go inside another place where the price of the rank is something nobody warned you about when you were climbing toward it. Every rank has a price. Stay dark.